Episode 11, The Voice and the Puddle. All praises is for Allah, who understands the finest mysteries, who brings to light that which hitherto lies hidden, and who is cognizant of everything that we do. After the recall of the episode of the stabbing, I am beginning to discern a special thread, which is being spun into the fabric of my existence. Whether this thread is going to lead me to the Mahdi I cannot say, but I determine to follow its course come what may. With this thought in mind, I jumped up from my chair and resumed my pacing of the room, asking why did the Almighty Allah choose me? The episode of the Voice and the Puddle came to mind. I was in my 17th year in Standard 9, and sad to say a romance spanning 3 years between Daphne and me was drawing to a close. It had started after an acquaintance of mine had directed an innocent remark towards a member of Daphne's family. An ugly connotation was put to it, and soon things spiraled out of control, and before I knew it I was knee-deep in a quagmire of recriminations out of which I could not extricate myself. With woebegone feelings, I am obliged to say, Daphne's father, Mr. George, who was overly fond of me, and I could not see eye to eye on matters flowing from these squabbles, with the result that he distanced himself from me. Daphne, who was 15 years old at the time, could not find a way to effect a conciliation between her father and me, elected to bring our friendship to a close. I, a youth of a mere 17 years old, did not know how to handle the situation, felt hurt by her decision, and out of pride more than anything else acquiesced. The sad part about it all is that at the time of parting the two of us were still very much in love with one another, and although she married somebody else about 2 years later, we still carried a torch for each other for many years to come. It was only about a decade later, after Daphne and all the members of her family had moved entirely out of the area and all forms of contact between us had been severed, that the flames burning inside me were finally quenched. On looking back, I realize there were many ways I could have salvaged the situation, but with the information now at my disposal, I must conclude that this was not to be, because the path which was mapped out for me necessitated that the two of us go our separate ways. After Daphne and I had come to the parting of the way for one reason or another, some members of her aunt's husband's family started to pick on me. It had started with Cliffy, a 15-year-old boy who happened to be the brother of her aunt's husband. Whenever he passed me in the street, he made me the butt of his jokes. At first I took no notice and chose to ignore him. He took this as a sign that I am scared of him, and became more bolder and more outrageous in his remarks. At last I could not take it any more. I approached him and told him that if he does not stop his nonsense henceforth, I will resort to violence if need be, to put an end to it. He immediately backed down. I suppose he saw the determination on my face and decided if it should come to a showdown that he would be the worst off. I thought this matter was closed, so I was caught by complete surprise when the very next day I spied Cliffy's 3 older brothers come marching down the street. They were not alone, because walking beside them there were others whom I did not recognize. I suppose these were other members of the family, or friends, or both. The only ones not present were Joey's eldest brother Lionel, the one who was married to Daphne's aunt, and Cliffy. The group comprised of about 7 males, ranging in ages from about 15 to 20. I just knew that they had come looking for me, and from the look on their faces I gathered that it spelled nothing but trouble for me. It was a sunny weekday afternoon. I was with my friends Ahmad, Alvin and Patrick, and we were all standing in the road having a conversation in front of Alvin's house. For the record, we all, including Daphne, the rest of the household and Anta, stayed in the same road. It was barely a few months ago when Daphne and her family had moved back into the area after living for more than 1 year in Ghost Town. Cliffy and company were staying 2 streets away, so they had to come out of their way looking for me. The minute they saw me they came straight towards us, and when they came within talking distance, Joey, Cliffy's second eldest brother, took over. He was a young man and about 3 to 4 years older than me, with a well-built physique. He had on a t-shirt and I could practically see the muscles rippling all over his body. On looking back, I suppose he must have done some bodybuilding exercises, but I cannot be 100% sure. In a most loud, belligerent, and aggressive tone he demanded to know by me why I had threatened his brother. Not even bothering to give me a chance to answer, he went on to say that I was a bully and that he had especially stayed out of work to come and give me a hiding and to teach me a good lesson. By now his tirade had attracted attention and a crowd was starting to gather, and not far away the people at Daphne's house were picking up their ears and listening to every word that was being said. Mentally, I had quickly summed up the situation and realized that in a fight I will be no match for Joey and stand a good chance of getting seriously hurt by him. In view of this, I made a last-ditch effort to get him to see my side of the story, but it was all to no avail. He had come to stomp me into the ground and nothing was going to change his mind. It seemed that violence was the only way to resolve the issue, and I had only 2 choices. 1. Submit to a stomping. 2. Put up a brave fight and look towards Allah for a favorable outcome. I opted for second choice. Having made up my mind, I told Joey that I am not scared of him, that he must do his worst, and that if his brother Cliffy does what I had warned him not to do, I will give him a sound thrashing. I spoke in such a way that my voice carried to all the listeners. On hearing this, he absolutely bristled with fury and demanded to know where we could go to be out of the public eye so that he could give me a good drubbing. Alvin suggested the cricket field, and we all made our way towards it. I knew that I was in serious trouble, and on the way I fervently prayed to Allah for help. The cricket field was situated between Brockhurst and Pinehurst roads, and when we got there, Joey elected to fight me at the top end near the cricket house in the vicinity of the trees. I from my side did not really care where we fought because I had already given up the battle. Nevertheless, I had resolved to give a good accounting of myself and hope that I will not sustain serious injury. When we got to the chosen site, Joey did not waste any time. He balled his fists and came charging in. So furious was his onslaught that I could do nothing else but backpedal. He gave me no quarter and came boring in, and soon his fists were raining down upon me. I from my side was also not lazy in this department and retaliated with a like onslaught. The only difference was that his punches carried more power and I was the one who was getting punished. I soon realized that I stood no chance in a toe-to-toe slugging contest with him and opted to go to ground, hugged him around the ankles and pulled his feet out under him so that he came tumbling down with a crash. He was not only surprised, but I sensed he got hurt as well. Quick as a flash, I was on top of him and piled in some shots. Being much stronger than me, he quickly reversed our positions, for with a mighty heave he threw me over so that I landed with a bone-jarring crash on my back. Lucky for me, I had seen what seemed to be the only puddle of water in the area coming to meet me and just managed to twist my body so that I landed with my left shoulder right at its edge. Soon I was at the receiving end of his pile-driving piston-like punches. And at the precise moment when it seemed that he was going to pound me to a pulp, a voice spoke up inside my head and said, "Shukri, grab his head with both your hands around the back of his neck and bring his head down your side so that his face is pushed into the puddle of water." As the voice spoke, I obeyed and executed its commands. By the time Joey realized that something was wrong, his face was already in the water. In order for me to release his head, there followed a titanic onslaught of his fists onto my ribs. Some of the punches also landed on the right side of my face, which was exposed to his left fist. At first Joey hit me so hard that in order to escape the punishment that he was meting out, I wanted to let go of his head, but then the voice whispered again and said, "Shukri, keep his head down in the water." After this I clung on for dear life, and gradually, ever so slightly, I started to ride with his punches, and realized that they were not hurting so much anymore. I don't know what went on in Joey's mind or what effect me keeping his head/face in the water had on him. All I know was that I had to keep it there, so I shut out the rest of the world and concentrated all my attention and energies on the task at hand. At last he tried to dislodge my hands with his, but this was not going to help him because, as far as I was concerned, my hands were made to stay. If it was left to Joey and me, I don't know how this fight would have ended. Matters were taken out of our hands when a man who stayed opposite the field put in an appearance and in a loud voice announced that if we do not stop the fight immediately, he is going to call the police. It was only then that I released Joey's head, and without further ado he got up from me and rose to his feet with me following suit. We were all in a hurry to get away from there because the man was still threatening to call the police. I did not notice that there was mud on Joey's face, and amongst the subdued crowd I caught sight of Cassium, staring at me with big awe-filled eyes. Cassium is my aunt's son. He is much older than me and was on his way home from work when he passed by and witnessed the fight. As we all trooped home, nobody spoke a word. When we were a safe distance away from the cricket field, I thought Joey was going to resume hostilities and was surprised that he did not. Just before we all parted to go our separate destinations, he turned to me and in a very subdued tone of voice said, "It is not over," and I replied that he must please himself. That evening and the next afternoon I waited for him to put in an appearance, but he failed to show. Somehow or another I had the feeling that Joey had enough and that it was all over. That evening, the evening of the second day after the fight, I walked down Hanbury Avenue, the road in which I lived. It was the early part of the evening and working up to be a perfect summer's night. I was on my way to pay a visit to Ahmed, who stayed down the road at the next corner. Lo and behold, as I neared my destination, I saw Cliffy come marching down the road. He was not alone but in the company of Francia. Francia was an ardent admirer of Daphne, and the time I used to go out with her, he used to pester her a lot. That she failed to return his overtures goes without saying, with the result that he took an intense disliking towards me. He would dearly like to see me get my comeuppance, and the fact that he did not do it himself was that he was not strong and brave enough. Now, with this trouble brewing between the Scott family and myself, it looked like Francia is finally going to see me brought down a peg or two, and he was in his element about it. Cliffy was not present at the fight between Joey and me, and I don't know what report he got about it, but he was just as cocky as ever. As the two of them came walking past me, I distinctly heard them snigger but chose to ignore it. They must have taken this as a sign of weakness from my part, because Cliffy passed an obnoxious remark directed towards my person, and Francia enjoyed himself laughing at my expense. In a jiffy I summed up the situation and realized that Cliffy is running away with the idea that he can go on taunting me because I am scared of the forces which he can mount up against me. In view of this, I could choose to ignore him and hope that he will eventually leave me alone. Immediately I discarded this idea because I did not know where he was going to draw the line, and evil, once it has reared its head, can quickly flourish and blossom out of proportion. I certainly had no intention of letting Cliffy go on mocking me, and irrespective of the consequences decided to settle this thing between him and me once and for all. Having come to a decision, I swung into action. I turned around and called out to him to wait up, at the same time walking the short distance to him and Francia, where they had come to a halt at the sound of my voice. I came to a standstill, right in front of him, and demanded to know by him when he is going to stop harassing me. Cliffy was not daunted by me at all, and in a most contemptuous manner he answered back and said that he has no intention of stopping whatsoever. He had scarcely finished speaking when I hit him with my right fist on the right ear. I had planned a shot, so I hit him with all the force I could muster. The impact of the blow was so powerful that it drove him to his knees. He clamped his hand over his ear and the blood spurted through his fingers. Cliffy ran screaming down the road with his hand clamped over his ear, and the screams continued long after he was out of sight. The screams were of such a nature that it could have woken up the whole neighborhood. I turned to Francia, who was rooted to the spot with his face drained of blood. I asked him if he wanted from the same medicine that Cliffy got. In a quavering voice he answered and said he did not do anything wrong, and pleaded that I must not hit him. Francia is the same age, if not a year older than me. I gave him a stern warning and told him that if I ever catch him sniggering or passing any remark my way, I will give him a worse hiding than Cliffy got. I told him to tell Cliffy's people the truth of what happened, and to tell them if Cliffy does not stop with his nonsense, I will do whatever it takes to make him stop. Francia was glad that I had let him off so lightly. He gave me the assurance that he will carry out my orders to the letter, and got out of there in hurry. As I walked towards Ahmad's home, I contemplated on the punch I had given Cliffy. I did not realize that the blow was going to have such a devastating effect. I was worried because I knew that repercussions were going to flow from it, and that before the night was out I was going to have to face it. My mind played havoc with me, and I imagined all kinds of happenings taking place, the most prominent of them all was Joey coming and screaming for my blood. When I entered Ahmad's house, his people, especially his father Boetalemi, noticed that I was not my usual self. Beside Boetalemi, the other people in the house were Ahmad's mother, my aunt Hava, smaller brothers and sister, a boarder Boetan Normi, and Cassium, another aunt's son. It was the self-same Cassium who had witnessed yesterday's fight between Joey and me. I knew that trouble in the guise of Cliffy's people are brewing and would soon come knocking on the door, so I decided to come clean and told them everything. They told me not to worry and assured me of their support. Cassium went on to tell how I had nearly drowned Joey in a small puddle of water yesterday, and Ahmad, who also witnessed the fight, confirmed it. This was the first time after the fight that I heard a first-hand report about it, and was glad to learn that I had given a good accounting of myself. All praise and thanks be to Allah. Since my arrival, scarce a half an hour had gone by when we heard a commotion outside and went out on the stoop to investigate. In the road in front of the house, there were a gang of about 20 people. They were all males, and they ranged in ages from 15 upwards to the mid-20s and slightly beyond, and they were armed to the teeth. Some of them had stout sticks in their hands, while others had spades in their hands, and one or two even brandished a pick. This gang had one thing in common: they were all screaming for my blood. Boetalemi spoke up and told the gang that they should be ashamed of themselves. He pointed out that they were 20 armed men who had come looking for a single unarmed man. Lionel, Cliffy's eldest brother, was their leader and their spokesman. In an angry, exasperated voice he demanded to know why I hit his brother like that. Again Boetalemi spoke up on my behalf and explained to him the whole situation. The rest of the gang, sensing that I might just get off the hook, wanted none of it and prepared themselves to come and take me off the stoop. Just at that moment, when it seemed that I am going to be in dire trouble, help arrived from an unexpected quarter. It came in the persons of Mohammad, Abdullah, and Hussein, and they went by the nicknames of Gamut, Dullah, and Sintja. Mohammad and Abdullah is my father's sisters Salma and Rashida's sons, and Hussein was a friend of theirs, and all three of them were not more than 2 years older than me. In addition, Gamut had his 2 vicious dogs with him. My 2 cousins and their friend were outraged to see that his gang had come to beat me up. While Dullah and Sinti went into the house to arm themselves, Gamut addressed himself to them, and he did not mince his words. He told the gang that I am his family, that he will not allow them to harm a single hair on my head now or in the future. He gave them an ultimatum and told them that if they did not disperse in the next minute, they must prepare to do battle with him and his friends. This gang, who was brave enough to confront one single unarmed man, showed cowardice in the face of a real fight, quickly faded away. From that moment onwards up to the present, I never ever had any problems from any of them ever again. Then I was back in the room on that fateful night in 1992. Praise be to Allah. In my quest to resolve the issue of the Mahdi, I had recalled this episode of the puddle. Continuing my pacing of the room, I reviewed the whole happening with the express purpose to see if I could find any threads which were sewn in this regard, and was not disappointed. 1. The puddle of water. What is the mystery behind it? Admittedly, it had rained about 1 week before the fight, but when we had entered the cricket field, we saw no sign of water anywhere. Although to me it would have made no difference, because I had already given up the fight. Joey, if he had seen the water, would have chosen a dry spot on which to fight. What about the fact that I had landed so conveniently near the puddle and in the best position possible to take the utmost advantage of it? I had landed with my left shoulder at the edge of the water. The advantage of this was that I depended more on the leverage of my right arm, which was my strongest arm. Another advantage, my face was not exposed to Joey's right fist, which was his most powerful fist, because his head was next to my face on his right side, so that it serves as a buffer between my face and his right fist. In view of this, I say Allah Almighty, who knows the future, knew that I will recall this episode and look for his hand in this affair, so my Lord, wishing to come to my aid in an unobtrusive way, had commanded the sun not to dry up the puddle, and the puddle not to sink into the earth, and this is easy for Allah, and Allah knows best. 2. The mysterious voice. Again, this voice did not fail to crop up at the opportune moment to save me from disaster. Who or what is this voice? And what is the logic behind it? Each time this voice had saved me, and after each time it had disappeared completely from my memory, as if it had never existed. Why? And what for? The enigma of this mystery still remains to be solved. 3. What about Joey? He was physically stronger than me. In the beginning, he was overeager to give me a good hiding, but after the fight he had fizzled out. He did not even put up a performance after I had hit his brother Cliffy a devastating blow on the ear. What had happened to him during the fight? Did he nearly drown? Was this man who came to put a stop to the fight sent by Allah? What would have happened if this man did not show up? I say, Joey would have drowned, and Allah Almighty did not want me to come into any trouble because of this. At the same time, Joey had learned a good lesson. After the fight I had never seen or heard from him again. It was only about 6 years later when by chance we saw each other. He delivered some ready-mixed concrete onto a building site at which I was working, but the two of us studiously ignored one another. For what about Cliffy? In his case I had amicably shown that I was not prepared to be oppressed by anyone. What about this punch I had given him? It had a devastating impact on him. Was there more to it than the I could see? Suffice it to say, he had learned a lesson, mainly, do not oppress anyone even if the odds are in your favor. After this I had never ever laid eyes on him again even unto this day. 5. What about the timely help which came from my aunt's sons and their friend? Again I discern the help of the Almighty Allah in this. You reader can use your own imagination of what would have happened if they did not arrive on the scene. I shared this whole happening and my spiritual insight into it with Charliza. Both of us were crying. At the same time we exclaimed another sign and both jumped for joy.